All right, so today we're gonna dive into Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, classic, and we've got excerpts from the book itself, and a really interesting article analyzing its impact, its lasting impact.
I'm excited.
Yeah, you might be thinking motorcycles and philosophy.
Right.
What's the connection?
Yeah, where's the through line?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But this book is so much more than just that. It's about finding quality in everyday life, battling those frustrating mental blocks that we all get sometimes.
Yes.
And it even uses a motorcycle trip as a metaphor for a much deeper journey.
It's amazing how the book manages to connect those different elements, motorcycles and a cross-country trip, and these really deep philosophical questions about how we live our lives.
Exactly. So to kind of kick things off, imagine a father and son on a 17-day motorcycle trip
Okay.
from Minnesota to California.
Wow.
They're taking in the scenery, but they're also having these incredibly thought-provoking conversations along the way.
Yeah, I love that.
And the author calls these conversations Chautauquas.
Yeah, and they cover everything from the meaning of life to the nature of quality.
That's cool. What makes this structure so effective is how closely it mirrors our own lives. We're all on journeys, both literally and figuratively.
Right.
And just like those motorcycle breakdowns in the book, we encounter challenges and unexpected detours that force us to kind of pause and reflect.
And just to add another layer of intrigue here, the narrator keeps having these flashbacks to his past self, who he refers to as Phaedrus.
Okay.
Phaedrus is this brilliant but troubled intellectual who grappled with some really heavy philosophical questions, and his presence really adds a complexity to the story that we'll kind of unpack a little bit later.
I like it becomes about self-discovery, confronting those past experiences that shape who we are,
Right.
and ultimately trying to understand ourselves better.
Right. So let's shift gears a bit and talk about one of the book's central themes,
Okay.
quality.
Yeah, the narrator spends a lot of time trying to define what it actually means.
Yeah. How do we know when something is good?
Right.
How does quality apply to our work, our relationships, even something as simple as fixing a motorcycle?
And this is where the book gets really practical and insightful.
Right.
I mean, think about a time when you were completely engrossed in something, whether it was a hobby or a project or even just a conversation. That feeling of flow,
Yes.
that's a glimpse of what the author is getting at. It's about finding that same sense of quality in everything we do.
I love that.
But as the book points out, there are these things called gumption traps
Okay.
that can really get in the way of finding and experiencing that quality. There are those internal and external roadblocks that just derail our enthusiasm and our progress.
I think we can all relate to that feeling of hitting a snag in a project and just wanting to give up. But the book goes deeper, exploring different types of gumption traps and offering practical advice for overcoming them. For instance, he talks about value traps, where we cling to outdated ways of thinking or doing things even when they no longer serve us.
It's like using an old, inaccurate map to navigate a new terrain.
Exactly.
You're bound to get lost.
You're going to get lost. And the book encourages us to question our assumptions, be open to new information, and be willing to change course when needed. It's about staying flexible and adaptable, just like the narrator does when he's faced with a motorcycle breakdown in the middle of nowhere.
Now, another key element of the book is this contrast between the narrator's approach to life and that of his friend John Sutherland.
Okay.
And they represent two very different ways of seeing the world, the classical and the romantic.
Interesting.
John the Romantic is all about spontaneity and feeling,
Okay.
while the narrator, with his more classical mindset, values logic and a systematic approach to problem solving.
Right.
How does the book use their interactions to explore these two different ways of being?
Well, the book uses the example of motorcycle maintenance to really illustrate this contrast. John the Romantic just hopes for the best with his bike and gets frustrated when things go wrong.
Oh, yeah.
He relies on mechanics to fix things for him. The narrator, on the other hand, enjoys the process of figuring out how things work and takes pride in being able to fix his own bike.
But it's not about saying one approach is better than the other.
Right, exactly. The book suggests that we all have a bit of both the romantic and the classical within us. And finding a balance between the two is essential for finding that elusive quality we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
We need the romantic sense of wonder and appreciation for beauty, but we also need the classical's ability to analyze, problem solve, and get things done. It's like we need both the telescope to see the stars and the microscope to examine the details of a single leaf.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Now let's circle back to Phaedrus.
Okay.
He's this intriguing almost ghost-like presence in the book, representing the narrator's past self. We know he was brilliant, maybe even a genius, but also deeply troubled. What can you tell us about his significance in this story?
Well, Phaedrus embodies this intense struggle with the limits of pure reason and logic. He pushed himself so far in his pursuit of knowledge
Hmm.
that it ultimately led to a breakdown.
Right.
And it's kind of a cautionary tale about the dangers of intellectual hubris and the importance of finding balance in our lives.
And it becomes even more poignant when you consider the real-life tragedy that shadowed this book,
All right.
the death of the author's son, Chris, who was actually on that motorcycle journey with him.
Wow.
It makes you wonder if the author, through the story of Phaedrus, was trying to impart some wisdom to his son, almost like a warning.
That's a really interesting point. It adds another layer of depth to the narrative. You can sense this underlying concern from the father, almost like he's trying to equip his son with the tools to navigate life's complexities and avoid a similar fate.
Yeah, it definitely adds a layer of emotional weight to the story. Now, before we move on, I want to touch on something that I think a lot of readers find confusing.
Okay.
The title itself, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Yeah.
It seems to suggest a strong Eastern philosophy influence,
Right.
but when you read the book, it feels more rooted in Western thought.
You're right. The title can be a bit misleading while the book does touch on Zen principles like being present and letting go of attachment.
Mm.
It's more deeply engaged with Western philosophers like Plato and Socrates.
And even the author's own experience, wrestling with a very rigid, by-the-book professor at the University of Chicago, plays a role.
It's as though the author is searching for a middle ground, a way to synthesize these seemingly opposing ways of thinking, East and West, romantic and classical, and that's what makes the book so fascinating. It's not about adhering to one specific school of thought, but about finding your own path to understanding and meaning.
Okay, I want to dive deeper into this idea of gumption traps, because I think it's one of the most practical and useful concepts the book offers.
Okay.
We've talked about value traps, but can you give us some other examples of these mental roadblocks that we all encounter?
Absolutely. The author identifies several other types of gumption traps. For instance, there's the truth trap, where we get so fixated on finding one absolute truth that we become blind to other possibilities.
Oh, I can definitely relate to that one. It's like going down a rabbit hole of research, desperately searching for the one definitive answer, but getting more and more frustrated when you realize there might not be one.
Exactly. And then there are ego traps where our own pride or self-importance gets in the way of learning and growth.
That reminds me of the part in the book where the narrator talks about how difficult it is to truly teach someone something if they're not willing to be humble and admit they don't know everything.
Precisely, the book highlights how important it is to cultivate humility and a willingness to learn from our mistakes. He also talks about anxiety traps, where fear and worry paralyze us and prevent us from taking action. And then there are boredom traps, where a lack of interest or engagement sacks our motivation.
It's amazing how he manages to pinpoint these very specific mental and emotional states that we've all experienced, but might not have been able to articulate.
And what's so valuable is that he doesn't just identify these traps. He offers strategies for overcoming them, for instance. He talks about the importance of breaking down large, overwhelming tasks into smaller, more manageable steps, or the power of simply taking a break and shifting our focus when we find ourselves getting stuck in a rut.
He even talks about the importance of cultivating a sense of humor and not taking ourselves too seriously.
Right, that's crucial because sometimes the best way to get unstuck is to step back, laugh at the absurdity of the situation, and approach the problem with a fresh perspective.
So if we think about all these different gumption traps, is there a common thread that runs through them? Is there a way to anticipate them or even avoid them altogether?
That's a great question. I think the common thread is a lack of awareness. When we're not paying attention to our thoughts, feelings, and motivations, we're more likely to fall into these traps. The key is to cultivate self-awareness, to regularly check in with ourselves and ask, what am I feeling right now? Why am I feeling this way? What are my goals? And are my actions aligned with those goals?
It's like having that internal GPS system, but instead of guiding us to a physical destination, it's guiding us towards a more fulfilling and meaningful way of being in the world.
Exactly. And that's really at the heart of what this book is all about. It's a guide to navigating not just the road ahead, but also the terrain of our own minds.
Yeah, it's like the book is a toolbox filled with all this practical wisdom and insights that we can use to navigate the challenges of like modern life. It's no wonder it continues to resonate with readers even decades after it was first published.
And it's not just about the individual journey. The book also touches on broader societal issues that
Right.
feel even more relevant today, like the author talks about information overload,
Yeah.
the fragmentation of knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
and the difficulty of finding truth in a world that's just saturated with all these conflicting viewpoints.
He even talks about the dangers of technology controlling us rather than us controlling it,
Right.
which is a conversation we're having more and more these days.
All the time, what's fascinating is how he ties all of this back to the idea of quality.
Yeah.
He argues that technology itself isn't inherently good or bad.
Right.
It's all about how we use it,
Mm.
the values we imbue it with, and whether it ultimately helps us live more meaningful lives.
So it's not about rejecting technology altogether,
No.
but about being mindful of how we interact with it and making sure it aligns with our values and goals.
Exactly. And this applies to so many areas of our lives. We're constantly bombarded with information, opinions, and choices.
Right.
The real challenge is cultivating the discernment to filter through all the noise and find what truly matters.
Mhm.
It's about finding that sense of quality in the digital world as well as the physical world.
Speaking of its lasting impact, it's pretty incredible that this book became a bestseller. I mean, the best-selling philosophy book of all time, in fact.
Wow.
And it's even been featured in the Smithsonian's America on the Move exhibit,
Yeah.
right alongside the author's actual motorcycle.
It's a real testament to the book's enduring power and its ability to connect with readers across generations.
Mhm.
It speaks to something fundamental within us, that yearning to find meaning and purpose and a sense of connection with the world around us.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance, what are the key takeaways you hope our listener walks away with today?
Well, I think the book offers us several invaluable insights. Firstly, it encourages us to seek out quality in every aspect of our lives, our work, our relationships, even the mundane, everyday moments. It's about being present, appreciating beauty, and striving for excellence in all that we do.
It's about approaching life with a sense of intention and purpose rather than just going through the motions.
Secondly, the book reminds us to be aware of those gumption traps, those internal and external obstacles that can derail our progress and enthusiasm. By understanding these traps, we can develop strategies to overcome them and stay motivated on our journeys.
It's about cultivating resilience, adaptability, and a willingness to learn from our mistakes.
And lastly, the book invites us to engage in deep thinking, questioning our assumptions, and being open to new perspectives. It's about embracing the journey of self-discovery and forging our own unique path in a world that's constantly changing.
So as we finish up, here's a thought-provoking question for you to ponder. What does quality mean to you? How can you apply the ideas we've explored today to your own life? What are your own gumption traps, and how can you overcome them?
The answers to these questions are deeply personal and unique to each individual. But by grappling with these ideas, we can begin to find our own paths towards a more meaningful and fulfilling life.
And if this conversation has sparked your curiosity, I highly recommend checking out the book itself. Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance is a thought-provoking read that will stay with you long after you finish the last page. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking out that elusive quality in all that you do.